Ambassador Zarathel adjusted her formal robes one last time, before entering the grand reception hall of the Galactic Council station. The fabric shimmered with threads of silver that caught the artificial lights, marking her status as one of the most important diplomats in known space. At 32 years old, she had already helped negotiate 3 major peace treaties and prevented 2 wars through careful words and patient listening. The reception hall buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages. Tall Andromedans clicked their mandibles in animated discussion with short, furry Balani traders. The crystalline ethereals hummed in harmonic frequencies that made the air itself seem to sing. Representatives from over 40 different species had gathered here to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the end of the Terran-Zephyrian War. Zarathel moved through the crowd with practiced grace, nodding to familiar faces and accepting congratulations on her recent successful mediation between the Outer Rim colonies and the Central Banking Consortium. Her pale blue skin and tall, elegant frame made her easy to spot among the diverse gathering, but it was her reputation that drew respectful bows from beings across the galaxy. She was reaching for a glass of Centaurian fruit juice when she saw him. Time seemed to stop. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the polished floor, but she barely heard the sound. Her heart hammered against her ribs as memories flooded back with crushing force. There, standing quietly near the refreshment station, was a human male in a simple military dress uniform. He looked uncomfortable among all the alien dignitaries, his dark hair now touched with gray at the temples. A long scar ran from his left ear down to his collar, disappearing beneath the fabric of his uniform. His brown eyes scanned the room with the careful attention of someone who had seen too much violence and now watched for danger out of habit. But Zarathel knew those eyes. She had stared into them 15 years ago when she was 7 years old, terrified and alone in the smoking ruins of her family's compound on Veltar. The human was older now, his face lined with the weight of years and experience. His shoulders were broader, his stance more confident, but the expression in his eyes was the same, fierce, protective, and kind. The same look he had given her when he found her hiding under the collapsed beam, too scared to cry. Zarathel's hands trembled as she remembered. The attack had come without warning. The hegemony forces had swept down on the peaceful Catherian colony like a plague of destruction. Her parents had pushed her into the reinforced closet in their home and told her to stay hidden no matter what happened. She had listened to the sounds of battle, the screaming, the terrible silence that followed. When the human soldiers finally arrived, most of the colony was already gone. She had been trapped for hours, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound. Then the beam had shifted and she had seen light filtering through the rubble. A strong hand had reached in and pulled her free. "It's okay, little one," the human had said in accented Catherian. His voice was gentle despite the chaos around them. "You're safe now. I won't let anything hurt you." She had been too shocked to speak, clutching the small crystal pendant that was all she had left of her parents. The human had wrapped her in his jacket and carried her through the burning streets to the evacuation ships. When she finally started crying, he had sung to her in his own language, a soft, slow song that somehow made the fear less terrible. Now 15 years later, that same human stood just 20 meters away. Zarathel forced herself to move. Her legs felt unsteady as she crossed the hall, dodging between groups of chattering diplomats. She had imagined this moment countless times over the years, wondering what she would say if she ever saw him again. All her carefully planned speeches disappeared from her mind. The human noticed her approach and straightened slightly, probably recognizing her from the diplomatic news feeds. He started to bow in the formal greeting appropriate for an ambassador, but Zarathel stopped him with a raised hand. Instead, she began to hum. It was the same melody he had sung to her all those years ago, a simple human lullaby about stars and dreams and safe harbors. The tune was soft and haunting, carrying across the few meters between them. The human's eyes widened. His mouth opened slightly in shock as recognition dawned. For a moment he looked exactly as he had 15 years ago, young, surprised, and infinitely kind. "Little star," he whispered in Catherian, using the pet name he had called her during those terrible hours after the rescue. Zarathel nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The human took a step forward, then stopped, uncertainty flickering across his face. She was an ambassador now, one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He was just a middle-aged soldier in a dress uniform that had seen better days. But she closed the distance between them and, ignoring all diplomatic protocol, threw her arms around him in a tight embrace. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for the song. Thank you for everything." The human's arms came up slowly to return the embrace. She could feel him trembling slightly, and when she pulled back, she saw tears in his eyes. "Zarathel," he said, and her name sounded beautiful in his accent. "I can't believe you grew up. You became—" He gestured helplessly at her ambassador's robes, at the respect she commanded from beings across the hall who had noticed their interaction. "I became who I am because of you," she said simply, "because you showed me that someone would always stand up to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Every treaty I negotiate, every peace I help build, it all started with the lesson you taught me in the ruins of Veltar." Around them, the reception continued. Other diplomats glanced their way with curiosity, wondering why the famous Catherian ambassador was embracing an unknown human soldier. But Zarathel paid them no attention. For this moment, the galaxy could wait. "What's your name?" she asked, realizing with embarrassment that she had never known. "Marcus Chen," he replied. "Colonel Marcus Chen now, though I'm thinking about retiring. I'm just here as part of the Terran diplomatic escort." "Colonel Chen," she repeated, tasting the sounds. "The human who saved my life. The warrior who gave me hope when I had nothing left." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not a warrior anymore, Zarathel. I'm tired of fighting. I've seen too much, done too much. I just want to find some peace." Something in his voice made her study his face more carefully. She saw the weight he carried, the ghosts that haunted his eyes. The war had changed him too, she realized. The young soldier who had sung lullabies to a frightened child had become something harder, more careful. But underneath it all, she could still see the protector who had risked everything to save strangers. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "it's time for me to save you." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, an urgent chime sounded throughout the reception hall. The crowd fell silent as emergency broadcasts began playing on the wall screens. The images showed burning ships and devastated stations, while news anchors spoke in grim tones about renewed hegemony attacks on the Outer Rim. The war, it seemed, was not as finished as everyone had believed. The transport ship shook as another explosion bloomed in the distance. 7-year-old Zarathel pressed herself deeper into the narrow space under the collapsed beam. Her small hands clutched around the crystal pendant her mother had given her just hours before. The pretty blue stone was warm against her palm, but it could not chase away the cold fear that filled her chest. Outside her hiding place, she could hear the sounds of destruction, the sharp crack of energy weapons, the rumble of falling buildings, sometimes voices shouting in languages she did not understand. But mostly there was silence, the terrible quiet that came after the screaming stopped. She had been hiding for what felt like forever when she heard new sounds. Footsteps, but different from the heavy boots of the hegemony soldiers who had attacked her colony. These moved more carefully, and she could hear voices speaking in low, urgent tones. "Sector 7 clear," someone said in accented galactic standard. "No survivors found." "Keep looking," replied another voice, this one deeper and somehow familiar. Intelligence said there might be civilians in the residential compound. "We're not leaving anyone behind." Zarathel held her breath. These were not hegemony voices. But she had learned not to trust strangers. Her parents had taught her to hide from anyone she did not know, especially during the bad times when ships appeared in the sky and people had to run. The footsteps came closer. Debris shifted somewhere above her hiding spot, and dust rained down on her head. She squeezed her eyes shut and tried to make herself even smaller. Then the beam above her groaned and shifted. Light stabbed into her tiny shelter, making her blink. A shadow fell across the opening, and she looked up to see a face peering down at her. It was a human face, young and dark-haired, with kind brown eyes that widened when they saw her. The human was wearing some kind of military uniform, but it was different from the black armor of the hegemony soldiers. This one was dusty green and gray, and the man wearing it looked tired and sad. "Hello there, little one," the human said gently in careful Catherian. His accent was strange, but his voice was soft. "My name is Marcus. Are you hurt?" Zarathel stared at him, too frightened to speak. She had heard stories about humans. They were supposed to be fierce warriors who fought in terrible wars across the galaxy, but this one did not look fierce. He looked worried and gentle like her father had when she fell down and scraped her knee. "It's okay," Marcus said, slowly reaching into the space toward her. "I'm going to get you out of there. You're safe now. I promise I won't let anything hurt you." His hand was warm and strong when it closed around her small fingers. He pulled her carefully from the wreckage, checking her for injuries with gentle touches. When he was satisfied that she was not badly hurt, he wrapped his own jacket around her shoulders. It smelled like smoke and metal and something else, something that reminded her of safety. "What's your name, little star?" he asked, using an old Catherian term of endearment. "Zarathel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's a beautiful name," Marcus said with a smile. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe, Zarathel. Can you walk?" She nodded, though her legs felt shaky. Marcus took her hand and led her through the ruins of her home, past broken furniture and scattered belongings. She tried not to look at the places where she had played with her parents just that morning, but it was hard to avoid seeing how everything had changed. Outside, the colony was destroyed. Buildings lay in ruins, their walls blackened by fire. The pretty gardens where she had chased butterflies were now craters filled with ash. The sky was orange with smoke, and she could see ships moving overhead like dark insects. Marcus led her toward a group of other humans in similar uniforms. They were loading wounded civilians onto a transport ship, working quickly but carefully. When they saw Marcus approaching with Zarathel, several of them smiled and waved. "Found another one, Sergeant?" called a woman with short hair and gentle hands who immediately knelt down to Zarathel's level. "She was trapped in the residential compound," Marcus replied. "Zarathel, this is Dr. Kim. She's going to make sure you're okay." The doctor examined her with the same gentle care Marcus had shown, but Zarathel kept her eyes on the human soldier. Something about him made her feel less afraid even in this terrible place. "She's in good shape considering," Dr. Kim reported. "Probably in shock, but no serious injuries. We should get her to the ship." As they walked toward the transport, Zarathel noticed that Marcus kept looking back at the ruins. His face was sad and angry at the same time, like he was trying not to cry. She had seen that expression on her father's face when he talked about the bad things happening on other worlds. "Are my parents coming?" she asked quietly. Marcus stopped walking. He knelt down so he could look directly into her eyes, and she saw something there that made her stomach feel cold and empty. "I'm sorry, little star," he said very gently. "Your parents, they can't come with us, but you're going to be okay. We're going to take care of you." She understood then, even though she was only 7. Her parents were gone like so many other people in the colony. She was alone now, except for this kind human who had found her in the darkness and promised to keep her safe. The transport ship was crowded with other survivors, mostly Catherians, but also a few beings from other species who had been visiting the colony. They all looked scared and lost like she felt. But Marcus stayed close to her, making sure she had water and a blanket, speaking quietly to calm her when the ship shook from turbulence. When she finally started to cry, not the loud sobs of a child, but the quiet, broken weeping of someone who had lost everything, Marcus held her carefully and sang to her in his own language. The song was soft and slow, about stars and dreams and places where no one could hurt you. She did not understand the words, but somehow they made the terrible emptiness inside her feel a little smaller. Now, 15 years later, Ambassador Zarathel stood in the reception hall of the Galactic Council Station, watching emergency broadcasts with the same human who had saved her life. The news was grim. Hegemony forces were attacking civilian targets again, using the same brutal tactics that had destroyed her childhood home. They said the war was over, Marcus said quietly, his eyes fixed on the images of burning ships. "We thought we had beaten them." "We did beat them," Zarathel replied firmly. "This is something else. A remnant, trying to restart what we ended." She looked at his face and saw the same expression he had worn 15 years ago. Sadness and anger mixed with determination. The young sergeant who had pulled her from the rubble had become a colonel, but the protector inside him had not changed. Around them, the reception hall buzzed with worried conversations. Diplomats from dozens of species clustered around the news displays, their voices rising in concern and confusion. Some called for immediate military response. Others urged caution and negotiation. But Zarathel kept her attention on Marcus, seeing how his shoulders tensed as each new report came in. She'd spent 15 years learning about war and peace, about the delicate balance that kept the galaxy from tearing itself apart. She knew that what they were seeing now was more than just isolated attacks. This was the beginning of something terrible. And she knew that the galaxy would need humans like Marcus Chen to stop it. "Colonel," she said formally, making her decision, "I think we need to talk." The private conference room was quiet compared to the chaos in the reception hall. Zarathel had used her diplomatic privileges to secure a secure meeting space, away from the crowds and the constant stream of emergency broadcasts. Through the large viewport, stars wheeled slowly past as the station maintained its orbit around the neutral moon of Kepler 7. Marcus sat across from her at the simple metal table, looking uncomfortable in the formal setting. He had removed his dress jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing more scars on his forearms, evidence of battles fought in the years since their first meeting. His hands, wrapped around a cup of coffee, were steady but showed the calluses of someone who still trained regularly with weapons. "I can't believe you became an ambassador," he said, breaking the silence. "When I carried you out of Veltar, you were so small, so quiet. I was worried you might never speak again." Zarathel smiled sadly. "I didn't for almost a year. The foster family on Kithera Prime was very patient with me, but eventually I started talking. And once I started, I couldn't stop asking questions. Why did the war happen? Why did people like the hegemony choose to hurt others? How could we stop it from happening again? Those are dangerous questions," Marcus observed. "The most important ones usually are." She leaned forward, studying his face. "You look tired, Marcus. Not just physically, deeper than that." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. 15 years is a long time to be a soldier. I've seen too many places like Veltar, saved too few people like you." He looked up at her with eyes that held old pain. "Do you know what happened after I got you to the evacuation ship?" Zarathel shook her head. She had always wondered, but the records from those chaotic days were incomplete. "My squad was ordered to pull back to the extraction point, standard procedure after a civilian evacuation. But there were still people trapped in other parts of the colony. We could hear them calling for help on the emergency frequencies." Marcus's voice grew quiet. "Command said it was too dangerous. The hegemony reinforcements were coming and we needed to withdraw." "But you didn't withdraw," Zarathel said, understanding beginning to dawn. "I couldn't. Not while people were still alive in there. So I disobeyed orders and went back in with 2 volunteers from my squad. We managed to save 18 more civilians before the hegemony arrived in force." He touched the long scar on his face unconsciously. "Cost us, though. Jenkins didn't make it out. Thompson lost his arm. And I learned that sometimes doing the right thing means carrying the weight of everyone you couldn't save." The pain in his voice made Zarathel's chest ache. She reached across the table and covered his scarred hand with hers. "You saved my life. You saved the lives of everyone who made it off that transport. You gave me the chance to become who I am today." "And look what you became," Marcus said with genuine pride. "I've been following your career, you know. The peace treaty with the Andromedans that prevented the trade war. Your work establishing refugee protection protocols. The way you've been rebuilding the alliance that won the war in the first place. You've saved more lives with words than I ever did with weapons." A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Zarathel activated the room's communication system, and a holographic display showed the worried face of Chancellor Vexhai, the current head of the Galactic Council. "Ambassador Zarathel," the Chancellor said without preamble, "thank the stars you're here. We need you in the emergency session immediately. The situation is deteriorating faster than we anticipated." "What's the latest intelligence?" Zarathel asked, switching smoothly into her professional mode. "The attacks weren't random. They were coordinated strikes designed to test our response capabilities and spread our forces thin. Our analysts believe the hegemony remnants have been rebuilding in the Dark Nebula for years, developing new weapons and recruiting from the criminal underworld." The Chancellor's tentacles writhed with anxiety. "They've issued an ultimatum. Full withdrawal of all member species from the Outer Rim territories, or they'll begin systematically destroying major population centers." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of new weapons are we talking about?" The Chancellor noticed him for the first time. "And you are?" "Colonel Marcus Chen, Terran Defense Forces," Zarathel said quickly. "He was at Veltar during the original war. His expertise could be valuable." "Very well. Colonel, our intelligence suggests they have developed some kind of planet-killer weapon, possibly based on stolen ethereal technology. They demonstrated it 3 hours ago on the uninhabited world of Kepler 9. The entire planet was consumed, turned to cosmic dust in less than 10 minutes. The color drained from Marcus's face. How many worlds are they threatening? 17 major population centers, including Earth, Kythera Prime, and the Andromedan homeworld. Billions of lives. The Chancellor's voice was grim. The Council is divided on our response. Some members want to negotiate. Others are calling for immediate military action. We need Ambassador Zarathel to help us find a third option. After the Chancellor ended the transmission, the room fell into heavy silence. Marcus stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars as if he could see the threat lurking somewhere in the darkness between them. They won't negotiate in good faith, he said finally. The hegemony doesn't make deals, they make demands. Give them the outer rim, and in 5 years they'll want the mid-rim. Give them that and they'll be threatening the core worlds. I know, Zarathel said quietly, but the Council species aren't human. They think differently about conflict. Most of them evolved as prey animals or hive minds. The idea of deliberately choosing a fight even to prevent a worse one later goes against their basic instincts. And humans? She smiled without humor. Humans are predators who learn to be protectors. You understand that sometimes violence is the only way to stop greater violence. It's why you went back into Veltar when everyone else was retreating. It's why humans won the first war against the hegemony. Marcus turned from the viewport. I'm retired, Zarathel. I turned in my combat authorization 6 months ago. I'm done fighting. Are you? She stood and walked to join him at the viewport. Because in 30 minutes I have to walk into that council chamber and convince 47 different species to risk everything in a war they don't want to fight. And I could use the help of someone who understands that some fights choose you, whether you want them or not. What are you asking me to do? Help me plan a strategy that can save those billions of lives without requiring total war. Help me find the human solution to an impossible problem. She looked directly into his eyes. Help me be as brave as the human who saved a frightened child 15 years ago. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and rubbed his face with both hands. You're not giving me much choice, are you, little star? I learned from the best, Zarathel replied. You taught me that protectors don't wait for someone else to take responsibility. All right, Marcus said finally. But I want to be clear about something. I'm not the same young sergeant who pulled you out of the rubble. I've done things in this war that I'm not proud of, made choices that cost lives. I'm not the hero you remember. Zarathel placed her hand on his arm. You're exactly the hero I remember. You're just older and wiser now, and that makes you even more valuable. Another chime sounded, this one more urgent. The emergency session was about to begin. As they prepared to leave the quiet conference room and return to the chaos of galactic politics, Zarathel felt a strange sense of completion. The frightened child who had been saved by a human soldier was about to walk into the most important meeting of her career, with that same soldier at her side. Marcus, she said as they reached the door. Thank you. For Veltar. For tonight, for everything. He squeezed her shoulder gently. Thank you for growing up to be exactly who the galaxy needed you to be. Together, they walked toward a future that would demand everything they had learned about courage, sacrifice, and the price of protecting those who could not protect themselves. The Galactic Council chamber was in chaos. Representatives from 47 different species argued in a dozen languages, their voices rising and falling like waves in a storm. The great circular room, designed to promote harmony and cooperation, now felt like a cage full of frightened animals. Zarathel stood at her designated speaking podium, watching the panic spread through the chamber. To her left, the Balani delegation chittered anxiously among themselves, their fur standing on end. The crystalline ethereals hummed discordant notes that made the air vibrate with tension. Even the normally calm Andromedans were clicking their mandibles in distress. Marcus stood in the observers section, technically present as part of the Terran diplomatic escort, but close enough to advise Zarathel if needed. She could feel his steady presence like an anchor in the storm of fear and confusion. Chancellor Vexhai called for order, but his voice was lost in the noise. It wasn't until the lights dimmed and an emergency alert tone echoed through the chamber that the representatives fell silent. We have just received confirmation, the Chancellor announced, his tentacles trembling. The hegemony has destroyed the research station at Kepler 12. 4,000 civilian scientists and their families are confirmed dead. The ultimatum has been updated. We now have 72 hours to begin evacuation of all contested systems. The silence that followed was worse than the chaos. Zarathel could see the defeat in the faces around her. These were beings who had evolved to survive through cooperation and compromise. The idea of choosing death before surrender was foreign to most of them. "We must negotiate," said Ambassador Relthos of the Vegan Confederacy, her scaled head bobbing with nervous energy. "Perhaps if we offer them partial control of the disputed territories." "They will want more," interrupted the Andromedan representative. "Predator species always want more, but what choice do we have? Their weapon can destroy entire worlds." "We could evacuate the threatened systems," suggested someone from the back of the chamber. "Relocate the populations to safer regions." "Billions of beings?" Chancellor Vexhi's voice was strained. "Where would we put them? How would we feed them? The logistics alone would take years, and we have 3 days." Zarathel listened to the desperate suggestions flying around the chamber: appeasement, retreat, negotiation, surrender. Each option led to the same inevitable conclusion. The hegemony would win by making the council too afraid to fight back. They would trade temporary safety for permanent subjugation, and in the end, everyone would suffer. She thought of Marcus's words from their private meeting. "Some fights choose you whether you want them or not." She thought of the lesson he had taught her 15 years ago when he went back into the ruins of Veltar to save people he didn't even know. Sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to risk everything. Zarathel activated her speaking podium, and her amplified voice cut through the desperate chatter. "Honored colleagues," she began, her tone calm and clear. "I understand your fear. We are facing an enemy that has demonstrated the ability to destroy entire worlds. The natural response is to seek safety through compromise. But I want to tell you about something I learned as a child." The chamber grew quiet. Zarathel's reputation as a peacemaker meant that even in this crisis, beings stopped to listen when she spoke. 15 years ago, my homeworld was attacked by these same forces. I was 7 years old, hiding in the ruins of my family's compound while hegemony soldiers destroyed everything I had ever known. When the rescue ships arrived, most of the human soldiers followed their orders and prepared to evacuate the survivors, but one of them heard that there were still people trapped in other parts of the colony. She found Marcus in the observers section and met his eyes. He looked uncomfortable with the attention, but she could see understanding in his expression. That human soldier had a choice. He could follow orders and retreat to safety, or he could go back into danger to save people he had never met. Do you know what he chose? The chamber was completely silent now. Even the ethereals had stopped their nervous humming. He chose to fight. Not because he loved violence, but because he loved life. He understood something that I think we have forgotten in our pursuit of peace. Sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to stand between them and those who would harm them. Sometimes the only way to save lives is to risk your own. Ambassador Relthos raised her clawed hand. But Ambassador Zarathel, we are not human. We do not have their aggressive nature. How can we fight an enemy with weapons that can destroy planets? We fight them the human way, Zarathel replied firmly. Not with aggression, but with intelligence. Not with hatred, but with love for those we protect. Humans don't win wars because they are violent. They win because they refuse to let evil triumph over innocence. She gestured to Marcus, who stepped forward reluctantly from the observers section. Colonel Chen, the same human who saved my life 15 years ago, has been analyzing the hegemony's tactics. Colonel, would you share your assessment with the council? Marcus looked around the chamber filled with alien faces, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of attention. But when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much war to waste time on politics. The hegemony is using fear as their primary weapon, he said. They want you to believe that surrender is your only option. But their strategy has weaknesses. They demonstrated their planet killer on an empty world because they want you to imagine what it could do to populated systems. But we don't actually know how many of these weapons they have, or how quickly they can deploy them. Chancellor Vexhi leaned forward. Are you suggesting their threat is empty? No. I'm suggesting it's limited. Marcus activated a holographic display showing tactical data. Look at their attack patterns. They're hitting research stations, military outposts, isolated colonies. Targets that generate maximum fear with minimal defensive capability. If they really had the power to destroy 17 major worlds, why haven't they attacked one of them yet? Why give us 72 hours to think about it? The Andromedan representative spoke up. Perhaps they are showing mercy? Marcus shook his head grimly. The hegemony doesn't show mercy. They're buying time because they need it. Either they're moving their weapon into position, or they only have one shot, and they want to make sure they use it for maximum psychological impact. Zarathel stepped forward again. Colonel Chen has developed a strategy that could neutralize their advantage before they can use it. But it requires something that goes against every instinct most of our species possess. It requires us to attack first. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. The idea of preemptive military action was almost unthinkable to most council species. Their entire philosophy of governance was built on reactive defense and diplomatic solutions. It's not an invasion, Marcus said loudly, trying to restore order. It's a rescue mission. Intelligence indicates they're holding thousands of prisoners from their recent attacks. Civilians they captured instead of killing. We can't negotiate for their release because the hegemony doesn't negotiate. But we can go get them. How? Demanded the Balani representative. Her fur still bristled with anxiety. Marcus smiled grimly. We do what humans do best. We improvise. We take unacceptable risks for people we've never met. We refuse to let the enemy choose the terms of engagement. He looked around the chamber. We don't fight their war, we fight our war. Zarathel could see the resistance in many faces, but also something else, a flicker of hope. These beings had spent so long thinking of themselves as potential victims that they had forgotten they could choose to be heroes instead. I know what I'm asking, she said softly. I know it goes against your nature to choose conflict. But 15 years ago, a human soldier taught me that sometimes the measure of who you are isn't whether you fight, but what you're willing to fight for. Today I'm asking you to fight for every innocent life the hegemony has threatened. I'm asking you to fight for the right to live without fear. She paused, looking around the chamber one more time. And I'm asking you to trust the human way of war, not war for conquest or revenge, but war to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The vote that followed was closer than Zarathel had hoped, but it was enough. 26 species voted to authorize the rescue mission, with 17 abstaining and only 4 voting against. It wasn't the overwhelming mandate she had wanted, but it was permission to try. As the chamber began to empty, Marcus approached her podium. You know this is probably a suicide mission, right? Even if we're right about their limitations, we'll be attacking their stronghold in the Dark Nebula with whatever ships we can scrape together. Zarathel smiled. Then we'd better make sure we get the right volunteers. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What makes you think anyone will volunteer for a mission like this? Because, Zarathel said, touching the crystal pendant she still wore. Beneath her diplomatic robes, you taught me that there are always people willing to risk everything to save strangers. We just have to give them the chance. The volunteer fleet was larger than anyone had expected. 3 days after the council vote, ships from 37 different species gathered at the staging point near the edge of the Dark Nebula. Human destroyers flew alongside Catherian medical frigates, Andromedan heavy cruisers, and even a few ethereal science vessels modified with weapon systems. It was not the largest fleet in galactic history, but it might have been the most diverse. Marcus stood on the bridge of the human flagship Defiant, studying the tactical displays with a mixture of pride and worry. The volunteers had exceeded every prediction, but they were still outnumbered and outgunned. Intelligence suggested the hegemony had at least twice as many ships, better weapons, and the advantage of fighting from prepared positions. Final count, Colonel? Asked Captain Torres, the Defiant's commanding officer. 437 ships representing over 2 million volunteers, Marcus replied. More than we hoped for, but probably not enough. Zarathel entered the bridge, now wearing modified diplomatic robes that included basic armor plating. She had insisted on coming along despite Marcus's protests, arguing that the prisoners would need to see a familiar face when they were rescued. "The Catherian contingent is ready," she reported. "They've converted their medical ships into troop transports, and they have enough supplies to evacuate 15,000 prisoners if necessary. If we live long enough to find them," Marcus muttered, then immediately looked apologetic. "Sorry, pre-battle nerves." Zarathel smiled. "You wouldn't be human if you weren't worried. But you also wouldn't be human if you let that worry stop you from doing what's right." The communication system crackled with an incoming message from the hegemony stronghold. The face that appeared on screen was everything Marcus remembered from 15 years ago. Cold, arrogant, and utterly without mercy. To the pathetic alliance of weaklings, the hegemony commander sneered. "You have 6 hours to withdraw from our territory, or we will demonstrate our power on one of your precious worlds. We suggest you choose quickly." Marcus stepped forward and activated his own transmission. "This is Colonel Marcus Chen of the Terran Defense Forces. We're not here to negotiate. We're here for our people." The hegemony commander's eyes narrowed with recognition. "The human from Veltar. I wondered when you would show yourself again. You cost us greatly that day." "Not as much as you're going to cost today," Marcus replied calmly. "Surrender now and we'll let you live." The alien's laughter was harsh and grating. "You come here with a handful of ships and threaten us? We have weapons you cannot imagine. We will turn your fleet to dust and then burn every world you hold dear." "Then you'd better get started," Marcus said, and cut the transmission. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The hegemony fleet moved to intercept the volunteer ships in the outer ring of the nebula, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. But they had made the same mistake countless enemies had made when facing humans. They assumed the battle would be fought on their terms. Instead of engaging in traditional ship-to-ship combat, the volunteer fleet split into dozens of small groups and scattered throughout the nebula. Using tactics borrowed from human military history, they turned the dark clouds and electromagnetic interference into cover, striking at hegemony supply lines and communication relays. Marcus led the most dangerous part of the operation, a direct assault on the prison complex at the heart of the nebula. The Defiant and 12 other ships punched through the hegemony defensive perimeter, while the rest of the fleet created diversions throughout the system. The prison station was a massive structure carved into an asteroid, heavily defended and designed to be impregnable. But the humans had not come to besiege it. They had come to crack it open like an egg. "All ships, this is Defiant," Marcus broadcast on the assault frequency. "Remember, we're not here to destroy the station. We're here to get our people out. Keep the exits clear and watch for civilians." The battle was brutal and costly. Hegemony fighters swarmed around the attacking ships like angry insects, while the station's defense batteries filled space with deadly energy. 2 human destroyers were lost in the first wave, and a Catherian medical ship barely escaped destruction when its shields failed. But the volunteers pressed forward with a determination that shocked their enemies. When the Andromedan cruiser Harmony lost its main engines, its captain rammed it directly into the station's primary defense platform. When Balani fighters ran out of ammunition, they used their ships as guided missiles to clear landing zones for rescue shuttles. Marcus led the boarding party personally, fighting through corridors filled with hegemony soldiers toward the prison levels. The fighting was close and desperate, with no room for tactics or strategy. Just the simple human truth that sometimes you had to walk through hell to save someone else. They found the first group of prisoners 3 levels down, mostly civilians, from the research stations, thin and frightened but alive. Zarathel was there to greet them, her diplomatic robes torn and dirty but her voice calm and reassuring as she helped organize the evacuation. "Where's the rest of them?" Marcus asked a rescued Catherian scientist. "Lower levels," the being gasped. "They kept the important ones deeper down as insurance." Marcus looked at his strike team, 12 humans and 2 Andromedan volunteers, all that remained of the original boarding party. They were tired, wounded, and running low on ammunition. The smart thing would be to evacuate with the prisoners they had already saved and declare the mission a success. Instead, he turned toward the deeper levels of the station. "Marcus," Zarathel called out. "The hegemony fleet is regrouping. Captain Torres says we have maybe 20 minutes before they overwhelm our covering force." "Then we'd better hurry," Marcus replied, checking his weapon. "Get these people to the ships. I'm going after the others. Not alone. You're not. Marcus turned to see volunteers stepping forward, not just humans, but Catherians, Andromedans, even a young Balani engineer who looked terrified but determined. These beings who had evolved as prey animals were choosing to follow a human predator into the darkest part of hell, because they believed in what he was fighting, for that the final battle took place in the deepest level of the prison complex, where the hegemony had been holding their most important captives. The commander Marcus had spoken to earlier waited there with his elite guards, confident that no rescue force would penetrate so deeply into his stronghold. He was wrong. The fight was savage and desperate. Marcus took a plasma bolt to the shoulder that nearly severed his arm, but he kept moving forward. The Andromedan volunteers fought with a fury that surprised everyone, including themselves. The young Balani engineer proved that courage could overcome instinct, using her technical knowledge to disable the station's internal defenses. When the smoke cleared, over 3,000 prisoners had been rescued. The hegemony's superweapon had been destroyed before it could be used again. And the galaxy had learned something important about the nature of heroism. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same reception hall where he had first reunited with Zarathel. But this time the gathering was different. Representatives from dozens of worlds had come to sign the Terran Protection Doctrine, a new galactic law that committed the civilized worlds to defend the helpless. Regardless of species or political affiliation, the rescue mission had cost them dearly. Marcus would never regain full use of his right arm. 43 ships had been lost and over 6,000 volunteers had given their lives. But they had saved nearly 50,000 prisoners and ended the hegemony threat forever. More importantly, they had changed how the galaxy thought about courage and sacrifice. Zarathel approached him as he stood near the viewport, watching ships from across known space arriving for the signing ceremony. She looked different now, older, more confident, carrying herself with the quiet authority of someone who had faced the worst the universe could offer and chosen to fight back. "Any regrets?" she asked softly. Marcus smiled, unconsciously flexing his damaged shoulder. "Just one. I should have taught you to sing that lullaby properly. Your accent is terrible." She laughed, the first genuine laugh he had heard from her since the battle. "I've been practicing. Maybe you can give me another lesson sometime." "I'd like that." Marcus looked around the hall, watching as young beings from dozens of species mingled and talked excitedly about their new roles in the Protection Corps, the organization that had grown out of the volunteer fleet. "You know what the best part of all this is?" "What?" "Look at them," Marcus said, gesturing toward a group that included humans, Catherians, Andromedans, and others. A year ago, half those species thought courage was something only humans possessed. Now they know better. You can't teach someone to be brave, but you can show them that they already are. Zarathel touched the crystal pendant she still wore, now incorporated into her new uniform as Director of Galactic Humanitarian Operations. "You taught me that 15 years ago. I just had to grow up enough to understand the lesson. And now you're teaching it to everyone else," Marcus observed. "The scared little girl I found in the rubble has become the protector of an entire galaxy." "We became protectors," she corrected gently. "All of us.